En este momento en que algunos dudan de la contribución de las tecnologías a la sustentabilidad de la agricultura y la seguridad alimentaria, este estudio pone en evidencia el papel clave que jugarán la labranza cero, la protección de los cultivos y el mejoramiento vegetal, entre otras tantas tecnologías. El estudio apunta a legisladores, autoridades, investigadores y todos los que tienen a su cargo definir las estrategias necesarias para garantizar la seguridad alimentaria en el mundo que crece, pero que cuenta con recursos cada vez más escasos. Es para nosotros, ASA, CASAF y Argenbio, un enorme placer poder contar aquí con uno de los autores del estudio, Nicola Cena. Nicola es analista de investigación de la División de Ambiente y Tecnologías de Producción del IFRI, donde trabaja en proyectos relacionados con las tecnologías agrícolas, el cambio climático y la adaptación a los eventos meteorológicos extremos. Previamente fue parte del equipo principal que elaboró el Informe Global 2010 del Banco Mundial sobre el cambio climático y desarrollo. Trabajando para el Banco Mundial, Nicola también fue coautor de un capítulo sobre los recursos agua y suelo, áreas costeras y biodiversidad del libro del Banco Mundial, Adaptación al Cambio Climático en Europa del Este y Asia Central. Recibió el título Laurea en Ciencias Biológicas de la Universidad de Bolonia en Italia y luego el título de Máster en Tecnología Ambiental en el Imperial College de Londres, con especialización en el manejo ecológico de los recursos naturales. Hoy compartirá con nosotros los principales resultados del estudio titulado Seguridad alimentaria en un mundo con una creciente escasez de recursos naturales, el rol de las tecnologías agrícolas. Nicola, muchas gracias.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Gabriela. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Sorry, this presentation will be in English. My Spanish is not very good. So. As Gabriela said, my name is Nicola Cena, and I work for the International Food Policy Research Institute in Washington, D.C. What I'm going to do today is show you some results of a study that we completed late last year, and we finally published in the February of this year. It's a global modeling study, global modeling exercise, where we modeled a list of agricultural technologies, and no-till siembra directa was one of these technologies. And we modeled them to try to assess the potential for increasing productivity of all of these different technologies. The title of the study that we published, like the title of my presentation, is Food Security in a World of Natural Resource Scarcity, the Role of Agricultural Technologies. What I'm going to do is to first go through the rationale for the study. I think it's important to have an idea of why we thought that this study was important, and we decided to move forward and actually do it. I will have some summary of the methodology that we used to give you an idea of the process that we followed. I will have some key results and then some conclusions and messages. So let me go right into it. So one of the main challenges that we have today as humans, if not the main challenge, is to answer to the question of how we can keep on feeding a growing population. We know that population growth, also income growth and urbanization, are really putting a strain on the global agricultural system. And they're putting a strain on these systems because these three factors translate into a much higher demand for food, but also a much higher demand for resource-intensive types of food and commodities like meat and milk. And this increased demand, first of all, results into higher food prices. And for an institute like IFPRI, which works specifically for world development, the issue is that these higher food prices go to hit directly those people that are already food insecure, and indirectly it hits those poor people who spend already a large share of their income on food. On top of this, we have climate change. Climate change is already affecting production in some areas through floods and droughts, for instance. and is projected to cause even much more dire effects, negative effects on productivity, for instance, the productivity of cereals. So you have, at the same time, you have population growth, income growth, urbanization, the need to adapt to climate change, and all of these increase the competing, well, basically compete for the same resources. So they put a stress on the same type of resources, specifically water and land. And to put it this in different words, you have basically the power-producing sector, the urban sector, agriculture sector, and industry sector, all competing for the same resources, putting a stress on these resources, on the environment, on biodiversity, and ultimately, this means an increased threat to the future productivity and sustainability of agriculture. If we look specifically at the productivity side, the consensus globally is that by 2050, we will need to double production of food in general. And my institute has simulated that and estimated that by the same date, we may need between 50 and 60% more cereals. However, the signs are not really good, because not really good for us to actually match this demand, because in the last couple of decades, the yield growth globally, the yield growth of cereals have been stagnating. And again, the consensus about what may be the main cause behind it is that there was a drop in investments in agriculture, in research and development for agriculture, in new technologies, new practices. So if we want to be able to keep up with the demand, with the growing demand, we need to start investing massively again in agriculture, in innovation for agriculture, new technologies, new practices. And the issue, partly the issue with that is that there is really a fierce debate about what we should invest in, what technology may be better in what part of the world. Part of the reason behind this fierce debate is that the choice of technology is not going only to affect production and productivity, but also environmental quality and the ability of a region and country to trade. Also, we lack evidence-based data and information on exactly on this type of question. Which technology is going to be better in one region or in another and under different climate change conditions? And this is where we came in. We decided that this was an important question, and so we started this, what we call an ex-ante study, meaning a modeling study of 11 different technologies, which you see here, specifically for 3 crops, for wheat, rice, and maize. And if you look at the list, there is siembra directa, no-till at the top, and the other technologies are all technologies that are consistent with this idea of sustainable intensification of agriculture. You have both high-tech solutions, like drought-tolerant varieties, heat-tolerant varieties, nitrogen use-efficient varieties, and you have, again, no-till or integrated soil fertility management or precision agriculture, which are known on one hand to have the potential of increasing yields, but also the potential to reduce resources use and possibly, therefore, have a much lower impact on the environment. So these next couple of slides are just to show you really the process we went through. The first step that we had to do was to actually better understand what these technologies actually meant in the field. What do farmers do when actually want to implement these technologies in the field? And so, for instance, no-till, it's mainly intended as you know, minimal or or no soil disturbance, and often is in combination with rotation of crops, with retention of residues and use of cover crops, and integrated soil fertility management is often a combination of both chemical fertilizers and organic inputs. Other examples, to give you an example of the other technologies, drought-tolerant varieties often are varieties that either are able to escape drought, meaning that they can complete their cycle before the onset of drought, or varieties that can actually withstand drought and so still produce good yields during the drought event. So what we did actually to model these technologies was to combine two different modeling systems. We started with a pure biophysical model. This DSAT crop model is a model used by agronomists worldwide. And this model is able to represent and simulate the growing stages of a crop. And the output of the model is some simulation of productivity changes, and also some information on how resources are used when you use different managements for different crops. So, for instance, the use of water or the use of nitrogen in the fertilizer. And then the results from this first crop model were used as an input into this second model, which is a global economic model. And this model, based on these changes in productivity, is able to simulate what may be the changes in price of the commodities that we are working with, which in this case were maize, rice, and wheat, and also simulate the changes in availability of calories, and therefore how the population at risk of hunger and how the malnourished children level could change worldwide and regionally. Yeah, I think I forgot to stress the fact that this study was global and regional as well, with also some country-level results. So this is again to guide you through the process that we went through. The second step we went through was actually to translate those technologies that you've seen on the slides from how they are understood in the field, how they are adopted in the field, translate them into quantifiable parameters that the model can actually understand and manage. So for instance, no-till was coded in the model as you have a regular, well, basically we switched off in the model the regular tillage, which is the tillage that is considered in the baseline. So that mold-bore plow was switched off, turned off, and then we also simulated a seed planting stick that would basically represent a minimal soil disturbance in the system. And we simulated no-till and all the other technologies at high resolution. So if you imagine the world, or at least the crop producing areas, wrapped in a grid, and in this grid each little square is 60 kilometers by 60 kilometers, we did all our simulations within each of these little quadrants, which we call pixels, actually. So in each of these pixels of 60 kilometers by 60 kilometers, we simulated two main scenarios. The first scenario is what we call business as usual or baseline. And it's a scenario where we assume that the farmers are not adopting these technologies that we are simulating. So they're not adopting no-till, they're not adopting drought-tolerant varieties or any of the other practices. They are keeping on adopting whatever their practices may be today. And there are other assumptions in the baseline, like the type of irrigation, the type of tillage, and type of varieties. So in each pixel, we simulated first this scenario, and then, again, in each pixel, we simulated instead the scenario where no-till or other technologies are actually adopted by the farmers. We simulated this adoption from 2010 to 2050, and then in 2050, we calculated this yield, what we call yield impact, is a % difference between the yield in the scenario with the technology and the yield under the baseline. And we did these simulations and these calculations under two different climate change scenarios. The first one is MIROC A1B, which is actually what I will use in this presentation. And the second one is CSIRO A1B, and MIROC is wetter, and so basically is simulating more precipitation and is also hotter compared to CSIRO. So as I was saying, then we did the simulations in each of these pixels, and then this yield change, this yield impact, was used as an input into the economic model, and the economic model was used to simulate how these changes in productivity may affect prices, and then may affect calories availability, and therefore the, changes in the population risk of hunger and changes in malnourished children. So let me show you first some results from the first model, from the biophysical model, the crop model. So what you see here is actually a global picture, a snapshot of these results aggregated from each single pixel up to the world level. So it's really is indicative, but it shows you how these technologies may do worldwide. And you see, yeah, the impact of, the impact of no-till, which we simulated only for maize and wheat. So potentially you could have a 28% increase in yields for maize in 2050 under this climate change scenario, and 32 for wheat. You can see also impact from other technologies like heat tolerance, 32% potential increase for maize, 20 for wheat. You see nitrogen use efficiency with good results, and you see also crop protection down here, and precision agriculture for rice and wheat, for instance. In some cases, people asked us, well, why, in some other presentations, why the results for no-till were so large, and so we did some tests. And the fact is that the way we simulated no-till is a continuous adoption of the technologies without interruptions between basically the years, well, yeah, between 2010 and 2050, basically for 40 years. And so our modeler actually did a test, and what he did was to try to see what happens if you, instead of actually having continuous no-till for 40 years, which would give you these results for maize and wheat under irrigated or rain-fed conditions with, for instance, a potential 23% increase in yields for rain-fed maize and 68% for irrigated maize, what would happen if you stopped, if you had no-till used only for 10 years and then regular tillage for 30, or no-till for 20 and then regular tillage for 20, or 30 and then 10, and you see how dramatic basically the yields are dramatically lower. These are some results, some regional results, only for no-till, again, in 2050, and again, still under the same climate change scenario. So you see, well, these effects for, they are divided in rain-fed and irrigated conditions. You see the effects, obviously, on, well, under irrigated conditions, often the results are larger than in rain-fed conditions. You see large effects still in Latin America and the Caribbean region, in South Asia, in Sub-Saharan Africa, and also in rain-fed conditions in South Asia for wheat, and irrigated conditions for South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa 92% here, potential increase for irrigated wheat in sub-Saharan Africa. Also, what we did was start to analyze how these technologies, and in this case, no-till and nitrogen use efficiency in particular, could help deal with the issue of resources use. In this case, trying to whether they could actually increase the efficiency of the use of resources. And in this case, you see some results on how no-till and nitrogen use efficiency may change the productivity of nitrogen. So this indicates that basically for wheat, under no-till, under the same climate change scenario, you may have a 29% less nitrogen losses in the field and a 28% increase in nitrogen productivity. These are, again, results aggregated at the global level, is preliminary, and what we're trying to do is to actually extend the study to look more specifically at the results in different regions and countries. Now I wanted to show you actually what happens with, well, some of the results of what happens when you take these changes in yields and you use them as an input into the impact model, the global economic model. So here you have the percent change in total production here, not productivity. So we're talking about changes in tonnage, if you want. For the group of developing countries, for maize, rice, and wheat again. So you see no-till with a potentially an increase of 10.6% in production for maize, again, in the entire group of developing countries, and 10.7 for wheat. You have good results for nitrogen use efficient varieties, precision agriculture as well, heat tolerance, and some good results for crop protection too. This is the same type of analysis and results. Oh, actually, no, sorry. I'm completely wrong. This is not production anymore. This is actually to show how this increased productivity may translate into savings of land. So you can get more production per unit of land, and this may help to limit the expansion of agriculture into ecosystems, for instance. So you have the, what you see here is that, for instance, for maize, again, in developing countries, you may have a saving of 7.5% in terms of area cultivated under maize in 2050. So you always compare to the baseline, to the business as usual. So if you didn't adopt these technologies, and no-till in particular, it means that you would have a 7.5% more land under maize in 2050. And these graphs are actually showing how the adoption of the different technologies may lower prices of these commodities, again in 2050, which is important in our view for food security. So you see that adoption of, for instance, no-till seem to be very good in lowering by 15.5% the price of maize in 2050. Then you have heat-tolerant varieties as well, and nitrogen use efficient varieties. And for wheat, you have no-till again with a very strong effect of lowering prices of wheat in 2050 by about 15%. And then you have precision agriculture and heat-tolerant varieties and nitrogen use efficient varieties. And then these changes in prices and productivity can, as I was saying, translate into more availability of calories. And what you see here is how this may result into changes in the populational risk of hunger for the group of developing countries. So this means that with the adoption, for instance, of no-till, you would have about a 9% reduction in the population of risk of hunger in the group of developing countries in 2050. And this is again changes in population of risk of hunger, but in Latin America and the Caribbean and in sub-Saharan Africa. You still see that nitrogen use efficient varieties have, in this case, the largest results, but no-till is immediately following with a 7% reduction in the population of risk of hunger and a 10% for sub-Saharan Africa. And the other output that we can simulate is the change in malnourished children. And here I'm showing for Latin America and the Caribbean and for sub-Saharan Africa. You see, well, no-till is up there with nitrogen use efficient, about 6% decrease in the malnourished children between the ages of 0 and 5. Yeah, so I wanted to, these were some of the main results. I wanted to leave you with some key messages. We see that the adoption of no-till is actually, seems actually very, very good in substantially reducing the prices of maize and wheat in 2050 compared with the baseline. The number of people at risk of hunger in developing countries may be reduced by about 9% in 2050, compared always with the baseline. And we have a potential 7% reduction for Latin America and a 10% for sub-Saharan Africa. There are definitely large effects of no-till in several regions. And as you have seen, often the impacts are larger under irrigation. There are always, one of the main results that we were expecting and we confirmed was that, yeah, there are large differences when you look at all these different technologies. There are differences about what technologies are best in different regions. And therefore, this means that it's important to carefully look about what to invest in different regions. And no-till seems to have the potentially best outcomes in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. This is the book that we published in February. It's here. And you can actually download it for free from the IFPRI website. And in addition to this, I wanted to show you that all the data that we produced, all the simulations, are available on this website. We have both the results from the biophysical model, the crop model, and from the economic model. So if you click, well, this is not very good, but if you click on these two buttons, you go first to the crop model, where we can choose either to see, well, you can choose the technology, the climate change scenario, the crop, and the type of irrigation or rainfed. And you can see results for the technology at the global level or at a regional level. You can also pick a country. And for instance, if you pick a region, you can then see how a technology how different countries actually, how different countries have different results for the specific technology. And also, if you click instead on the economic model button, you have the possibility of seeing results for, as I was showing you, for area, for savings basically in cultivated area, changes in yields and production, also results for trade and for prices, and also changes in the outputs for food security, meaning calories availability again, population at risk of hunger, and the malnourished children. And finally, I wanted to thank you for the invite and thank CropLife International and the US State Department and the CGR research program on policies, institutions, and markets, because they have funded this work. And I always like to thank the advisory technical panel, because they really supported us all throughout the project. So thank you very much again for the invite, and I'll be here for questions.
Bueno, acá hay una pregunta que dice, ¿cuál crees que será el rol que jugará la agricultura orgánica para cumplir con la tarea de alimentar a una población en crecimiento y con escasos recursos?
Yeah, I think I understand the question. Well, during the course of this project, of this research, we actually had several workshops with colleagues in South America, in Brazil, in India, and we always heard the same answer to actually this question, because we had the same question for them, for the experts, and they always told us that they didn't see any role for organic agriculture for cereals. The answer was always that organic agriculture may have a role for niche markets, for vegetables, for instance, for fruit, but in terms of providing calories and being able to produce the amount of cereals that we need to actually face food security, they didn't see really a sustainable role. And if you look also at the literature, a lot of what you read is that for organic agriculture to actually be able to be sustainable and produce the amount of cereals and calories that we need, we would need a lot of organic inputs for those fields, and that would mean actually expanding much more the land under agriculture to produce those organic inputs for organic agriculture. So I guess in summary, it seems like the consensus is that organic agriculture can have only a role in niche markets and not to tackle directly food security.
La pregunta dice, según lo que mostraste, los agroquímicos son importantes para la producción de alimentos, sin embargo, hay mucha controversia con respecto a estos y la salud, o su impacto sobre la salud. ¿Cuál es tu opinión?
Sí. So as researchers, we really think that the type of challenge that we have to meet the increase in demand is that we really need to be able to look at all possible technological solutions. At the same time, we are aware that some solutions may have some risks to health or to the environment, but those risks need to be faced with regulations and with regulatory instruments that can actually provide some protections for the consumers and the user of the technology itself. And this is happening in different parts of the world. Laws and regulations for the handling of these products are being developed.
Me dicen, hay una más y después hay alguien del público. ¿Crees que las tecnologías son realmente lo único que se necesita para paliar el hambre?
This is actually, I think, a very interesting question, because technology and increasing of agricultural productivity is absolutely critical for us to be able to, again, to respond, to keep up with the demand. But the challenge is really big, and what you hear more and more is that only betting on one solution is not going to be enough. And so other avenues, other options that are being discussed is, for instance, trying to reduce waste of food. And this means, for instance, providing places that don't have refrigeration, for instance, with refrigeration systems so that the food that is produced doesn't spoil and waste after harvest. Another issue is that, as you probably all know, we already produce today enough calories for the entire world. But there are issues of trade and distribution of this food that don't allow everyone to be able to have access to the same amount of calories. And so it will take a lot of political will to actually improve distribution and trade of goods. And finally, another option that you read sometimes about is, and it's probably a little more difficult because it's about behavioral change, is probably referring more to rich countries, and it's about basically the reduction in consumption of resource-intensive foods like meat, basically convincing people in more rich countries to reduce their consumption of those commodities that require a lot of resources to be actually made. So basically, in summary, is productivity and investment in agriculture must happen for us to be able to face and to solve food security, but it cannot be the only weapon. We need to have other options because we cannot really afford to only bet on one solution.
Buenas tardes. Al final respondió parte de lo que de la pregunta que le iba a hacer, y básicamente es que la exposición de él fue sobre la investigación en la producción. Y la pregunta que quería hacerle era si hay algún instituto o si hay líneas de investigación por el lado del consumo, porque según la bibliografía hay 1/3 de la producción de alimentos que se desperdicia, pero con la respuesta que dio a la pregunta anterior, creo que más o menos respondió. No sé si quiere agregarle algo más a estos. Básicamente, si hay líneas de investigación respecto al consumo. No solo, o sea, para el lado de la producción sabemos que hay muchas, pero concientizar el consumo.
I think actually that, as far as I know, there haven't been any type of research or simulations on what could happen if you, for instance, were able to reduce consumption of 1 or 2 commodities of this much, let's say of 30% by 2050. I don't know that anybody has tried to do that yet. It would be actually, very interesting to try to combine this type of research with a simulation of different scenarios of reduction in consumption. Yeah, that would be very interesting. Also, in terms of waste, I don't know of any projections, but in some cases, I heard numbers of food waste of up to 30% of the food produced in a region, which is really an incredible number. So that would be, I mean, I think it would already made a lot of progress just by tackling that one issue.
¿Alguien quiere hacer alguna otra pregunta? No sé si enviaron alguna pregunta o del público. ¿No? No tenemos todavía algunos minutos y fuimos en tiempo. ¿Cómo? No hay más preguntas. ¿No hay más preguntas? Bueno, les agradecemos mucho y otra vez feliz día del ingeniero agrónomo para todos, que son la mayoría de los que están acá. Hasta luego.
Thank you.